All right. Thank you so much for being here. Hello to everyone, and welcome to the webinar, RISE Consortium Collaborating with DoD to Enhance Energy and Climate Resilience. My name is Laura Binold, and I'm your host today from Tech Connect. Tech Connect is a global research and innovation event and media leader, and we have more than 20 years of experience connecting emerging technologies with funding and partnership opportunities. Every year, we prospect, vet, and connect thousands of emerging technologies for industry, investment, and government clients. And we're just thrilled to have you. Just some housekeeping items before we get started. I just want to remind everyone here to remain on mute and off video throughout the webinar just to reduce distraction. But if you do have questions, we would really love that. And we'd encourage you to enter them in your control panel under the questions section. And I know that our speakers will get to as many of those as they can. I also want to make you aware, if you're not already, that we are recording this webinar. I just want to make you aware of that. So why are we here today? The mission of the Resilient Infrastructure and Secure Energy Consortium, RISE, is to address the energy security and climate crisis by reimagining how the Department of Defense uses, generates, transports, and stores energy, and how it can build efficient, modern, resilient infrastructure. So today we're going to focus on the climate and energy security crises and highlight how the RISE Consortium is uniquely positioned to address that. You'll gain a better understanding of other transaction authority, its growth throughout the federal government, and the benefits of joining the RISE Consortium to leverage the speed and flexibility of contracting through that consortium model. You'll learn those things and many more today from our speakers. So to tell you a little bit about them, Michael Wu is the co-founder of Converge Strategies, which is a consulting firm focused on the intersection of clean energy, resilience, and national security. Michael previously served as a senior advisor on energy resilience and clean energy in the U.S. Air Force. And in that role, he founded the Resilient Energy Demonstration Initiative and helped create the Air Force Office of Energy Assurance. So lots of deep background and understanding there. He's here today as the Executive Director of the Resilient Infrastructure and Secure Energy RISE Consortium. And the RISE Consortium was stood up this year by Converge Strategies and ATI, Advanced Technology International. And they're confronting the energy security and climate crises by serving as a forum for the federal government and industry to engage and co-collaborate on energy and resiliency policies, standards, and programs. And today, Michael is joined by Chris Van Meter, the President and CEO of Advanced Technology International, as I mentioned before, ATI. Chris joined ATI after serving for 20 years in the US Navy, and he currently oversees the strategic direction of ATI, leading the R&D collaboration management firm, accelerating the impact to federal government and various industries. And ATI's mission is to lessen the burden of government by supporting federal government agencies, industry, and universities in the collaborative execution of our nation's most innovative research initiatives. So today, Mike and Chris will provide an overview of the mechanics for how the RISE Consortium is positioned to work with innovators to rapidly deploy technologies for installation and operational energy, integrate energy and climate resilience for energy, and climate collaboration for the US military and the federal government. So thank you both for joining us. I'd like to invite Michael now to go ahead and kick things off for us.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura. Really appreciate the introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here with my much more accomplished and brilliant colleague, Chris Van Meter, to talk about RISE. We're also very thankful for this partnership with Tech Connect. I've had the opportunity to work with Tech Connect for nearly a decade now, and really I don't think there's anybody better positioned within this space, particularly focused on technology development and deployment for government and Department of Defense use than Tech Connect, and we've been thrilled about this partnership. I'm also really thankful to see so many friends and faces in the attendee list, including a lot of RISE members, as well as former government colleagues. So thanks for joining. What I want to talk about today and what you can expect to see today is a few different things. One is the challenge. Why are we creating the Resilient Infrastructure and Secure Energy Consortium to address what challenges we face as a nation, as a defense department, and as a government today? Number two, I want to invite Chris to talk about something he's deeply steeped in, which is other transactions authority and some of the opportunities for companies and other organizations that are trying to work with government to access the opportunity to work together with government and collaborate directly with government through other transactions authority. So we'll get into that. And then third, how you all can get involved. And I think there are a multitude of ways in which we would invite you to join us in Rise into this challenge. The one thing I want to say is we will be going through this presentation, but we are ready to answer any questions that you have as an audience. We'll try to get through this presentation relatively quickly so that we have plenty of time to address your questions, which again, as Laura mentioned, you can introduce through the questions box in the control panel. All right, so why are we here? What is the challenge that RISE is being stood up to face? Number one is, we as a Defense Department are reliant on critical infrastructure for our critical missions and assets in ways that are only becoming more dependent and more constrained. And one of the things that we've seen viscerally over the past decade, but particularly in the past 5 or 6 years, is that critical infrastructure is at risk. So if you look at the Defense Department's portfolio, even on domestic installations, it's massive. If you add up all the land that the Department of Defense controls, it's roughly equivalent to the state of Pennsylvania in land area. And on those installations, even in the domestic United States, there are critical missions and assets that are providing combat capability, combat readiness, and incredibly important national security and national defense mission capabilities to our forces today. And those are simply at risk today in ways that they haven't been in the past. You can look at increased and more frequent and severe extreme weather events, like the storms that severely damaged Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, or Camp Lejeune Marine Corps Base in North Carolina, or Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, that suffered catastrophic flooding. Tyndall Air Force Base was nearly completely destroyed and is still being rebuilt. You can look at determined adversaries, including the Colonial Pipeline attack from earlier this year that shut down much of the fuel supply to the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. But what you'll see across the board, from California to Alaska to the Southeast, is that threats to our critical infrastructure in the domestic United States are impacting the Department of Defense's capability of maintaining critical defense missions and facilities and installations. And I think that's something that most experts would agree is only going to be more relevant and more concerning going forward. So number one is threats to critical infrastructure within the domestic United States is creating a cause for concern. Number two, our forces rely on energy for literally everything that we do. And so our ability to use energy, our ability to supply energy to those forces, our ability to think efficiently from a capability standpoint, those are all concerns that are going to be exacerbated in the increasingly difficult and volatile strategic environment that we will face in the future. As things like climate change, as things like the return of near-peer competition from other countries become more and more apparent, we need to think about operational and energy investments not only as ways to help our forces become more efficient, but actually as key capabilities to face this strategic environment in the future. Things like reducing fuel resupply requirements or reducing noise and heat signatures. Those are all investments that can be made in our forces today using many many times using commercial off-the-shelf technology or helping develop next generation technologies, all of which will be crucial to ensuring freedom of action for our forces going forward. And this administration has recognized the concern around climate change and how that exacerbates the volatile strategic environment that our forces will face in the future. From his first day on the job, Secretary Austin has made climate change a key driver in reshaping the Department of Defense and our force structure for the military services around becoming a climate resilient force. And so those kinds of investments, we believe, are going to create an influx of new resources, new programs, and a new focus around many things related to climate and energy action within the Department of Defense. And that's really, again, what Laura alluded to when she talked about the mission of RISE. The mission of RISE is to bring together the private sector actors, and that includes a wide range of members that we'll talk about in the, shortly, but a wide range of members who are the most innovative actors in the United States today and around the world, to come together to reimagine the way we approach and address our energy security and climate crises by building more efficient, modern, resilient infrastructure and transforming the way we use, generate, store energy. And so that's why we've stood up around these three key pillars, these three key priorities. How are we going to strengthen the energy resilience of our DoD installations? How are we going to strengthen the energy resilience of our forces? And how are we going to prepare the entire department, the entire government, and the entire nation around the challenges and threats associated with climate change? So, as I mentioned, that's our mission, and that's the challenge that we face. But now I want to turn it to Chris Van Meter from Advanced Technology International, who we're incredibly proud to partner with on the RISE Consortium, to talk about why this particular approach we think is exactly suited for climate and energy action going forward. So let me turn it to you, Chris.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. As Laura said and Mike said, my name is Chris Van Meter, and I work in Charleston, South Carolina for Advanced Technology International, arguably the largest consortium management firm. We manage portfolio or technology-focused consortia that range from technologies to be operated beneath the ocean to low Earth orbit and everywhere in between. Most of these consortia operate under the auspices of Other Transactions Authority and use Other Transactions Agreements, an authority provided by Congress in 1958 and updated many times since, that I see as a real game changer or accelerator to the development of real innovation because of the way it engages not only the traditional industrial base, but those folks who are working outside in the commercial industry, but look for opportunities to commit resources and their innovative technologies to federal government problems and provide real solutions that might not otherwise be accessible under traditional acquisition authorities. Next slide, please. So Other Transaction Authority, or OTAs, and I'll use that term a lot. The A is either used as agreement or authority, depending on the application. It's not magic. It's not a panacea. It's not the wild, wild west. It's not just you have a solution, I have money, here you go. It's a contract. It binds the parties to performance and ultimately to payment. There's two types that were authorized in the code in 10 U.S.C. 2371. One's a research OT, which we're not really referring to here. It's really designed for basic and applied research and advanced research projects, and it has some pretty significant cost share requirements in the authorities. The one that the RISE Consortium is focused on implementing when it ultimately gets to the process is the prototype of Other Transactions. prototype other transactions are really focused on engaging non-traditional defense contractors, those who don't typically do work for the federal government. And they do that in a number of ways, but the most significant way that 2371B encourages the use of non-traditionals is by reducing the need or the requirement for cost share if non-traditional providers either are the prime agreement holder, if you will, to use a FAR-based terminology or regular government contract and acquisition terminology, or if a non-traditional contractor participates to a significant extent in the research and development project. A more recent change to the code on other transactions authority is the ability to transition if the prototype project, the research and development project that delivers a prototype is successful, you can transition directly to production under the other transactions authority. Again, it's not a panacea. It's not, a lot of people will tell you that it's the wild, wild west, or it's a way to get around the FAR. Couldn't be further from the truth. It just adds flexibility that's not available under the traditional acquisition processes, and it focuses on getting clear requirements and ultimately the best solutions. And then finally, as I said earlier, and I'll repeat multiple times throughout my presentation, is it encourages the participation of those who might not otherwise participate and allows for dynamic teaming throughout the process. Next slide, please. Although other transactions authority has enjoyed a resurgence over the last half a decade, last 5 or 6 years, it really isn't new. It's just enjoying its semi-renaissance, not necessarily a renaissance of use, but rather of recognition. Other transactions authority can be tied back to the launch of Sputnik in 1957, which really started the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States. Immediately after Sputnik was launched in 1957, the US government saw a need to enjoin that race and didn't really see a great way to do that. The in-place acquisition at the time, and we're talking 1957, the in-place acquisition at the time would not permit the US to achieve a goal of putting a man on the moon or on the lunar surface in the time they felt necessary to compete in this space race. At the time, an individual said, we need more commercial-like agreements. And out of that discussion with Congress and the legislature in general, the Space Act of 1958 was created, and that created both the NASA and Space Act agreements, which is really the initial instantiation of other transactions agreement. Through the years, the authorities changed dramatically. It's changed to enjoin more participants. And as you can see by the timeline here, more importantly, it's changed to enjoin more agencies than just NASA. DoD started to gain the authority through DARPA in the mid to late 80s, and then the entirety of DoD in 1989 had other transactions authority, and it has continued to expand to other agencies through the early 2000s. This is incredibly important as we look to stand up the RISE Consortium. And why do I say that? Because the more agencies with authority, the better in the case of RISE, because the challenges we hope to address really extend far beyond just the Department of Defense or the Department of Energy. So having these agencies with this authority allows us to engage those agencies under a single agreement and ultimately deliver solutions that are more vast than just the DoD or DOE may want. 3 huge changes over the years that I've talked about, and just to talk about the most recent changes that have affected ATI, converged strategies, and ultimately the RISE Consortium, is the use of consortia to execute portfolio-based R&D. And when I say portfolio R&D, what I'm really referring to is you can do a single other transaction if you have a single technology that is needed. But when an entire portfolio of technologies is necessary to deliver a capability or an extended solution, as in energy resilience, combating climate change, and technologies to support those areas, there's multiple technologies that need to be acquired or developed. In doing that, if you have a broad portfolio, you need a broad set of participants to execute those projects, and thus the need for consortia to execute these collaborations, and ultimately the RISE Consortium was formed. The other thing that's really changed dramatically over the last 5 years, if you've paid attention to government acquisition, is the amount of money that's flowing through these other transactions agreements. As I said, they've been used pretty consistently in a very limited format over the last 50 plus years, but the amount of funding flowing through them has dramatically risen. I think there are some estimates that say greater than $20 billion is expected to flow through other transactions agreements in fiscal year 22. I know in fiscal year 20, about 15 billion, although that included a lot of Operation Warp Speed technologies. But it's becoming more popular because of the absolute need to bring in non-traditional defense contractors to support the mission. Next slide, please. So this is just a cool picture. It really is, and it's intended to be somewhat significant and to reiterate the relevant use of OT authority. SpaceX, and here you see the SpaceX Dragon, a picture of it, a nighttime picture. It's really just a cool picture, but the other transactions authority that was developed in 1958 remains incredibly relevant today. Operation Warp Speed vaccine development and distribution was done through other transactions agreements, at least partially. Space missions, and again, technologies ranging from undersea technology innovation to low Earth orbit, and standards development are being done other transactions authorities. The RISE Consortium is just the next frontier. We've talked about space, we've talked about unmanned systems, satellite servicing. The Resilient Infrastructure and Secure Energy Consortium, we believe at Converged Strategies in ATI, and a lot of the folks we're talking to believe it really is the next frontier in innovation and desperately needed by the federal government and its partners. Next slide, please. So this is probably a little bit more PR than I would have offered, but ATI has been managing consortia. This is all ATI does, is manage these consortium, early standards-based technology consortia and consortia focused on shipbuilding affordability. ATI has built its company and currently manages 20 different technology consortia, 14 of those under the auspices of other transactions authority. We have over 3,600 members participating in these consortia. About 75% plus are non-traditional defense contractors because of the ability to engage with the federal government and not be a fully compliant defense contractor. They have compliance, they have systems that allow them to participate under this vehicle. The real bridge between federal dollars and the need to acquire a portfolio of technologies and then access to these consortia that include large companies, small companies, traditional contractors, non-traditional defense contractors, nonprofits, financiers, utilities, anything that you can imagine that could add a hand to developing innovation when it comes to resilient infrastructure and secure energy can participate in this consortium. And the bridge between that is what we've been talking about, the other transactions agreement. Again, not magic, it's just an agreement between the government and the consortium of these members, and it sets the rules, it provides the rule set for executing these projects and ultimately delivering innovation. And you'll see in the next slide that the process is not unlike traditional acquisition processes, either in the commercial world or the government world. A requirement's an announce. Oftentimes there's some back and forth on the requirement to make sure it addresses state of the art and addresses the art of the possible. When the requirement's announced, they'll solicit for proposals. People, companies, universities, nonprofits will submit a bid or submit a proposal. Those proposals are evaluated and ultimately a project is awarded and the work begins. What's tremendously different from traditional acquisition processes is that it can go a lot faster. We can surge to meet the demand of proposals, and we can turn around the evaluations in a manner that the work will be executed, can start typically within 90 days of requirements being announced. There's a lot of times that it goes a lot slower than this for various reasons. Sometimes the requirements change. Sometimes the folks that need to actually make the final decision are not available because they're tasked with something else. But this process can work in a rapid fashion and deliver award funding that allows projects to get going in a lot faster manner than traditional acquisition methods. I think that concludes where I go, and now I get to turn it back over to Mike. And again, I look forward to reading your questions. I'm watching them as they come up in the chat box, and I'll let Mike get through this, and then we'll start to address the questions. So if you have any for me, I want to answer them here today, but I also want to make myself available anytime after this conference to have a conversation with you so that I can answer questions. Very happy to be here, and glad to be with Tech Connect. We've been working with them for a long time, and now I'll turn it back over to Mike. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And you stole my line. If you have questions, we're going to go through the rest of this presentation to make sure that everybody has all the information available. But then we'll come back and I'll engage Chris in some moderated questions based on what we're seeing in the questions box. So I think Chris hit on a lot of really important points about RISE, but I do want to highlight some of the things that that he touched on. So other transactions authority is built where there's an important critical government national interest or national security interest and needs to access the private sector really quickly. And in some of the other examples that we saw before in commercial space or remotely piloted aircraft, those are industries in which, you know, there was a government requirement, and that led to immense, you know, the standing up of entirely new civilian sectors. The difference between what we work on with RISE and what we and those other examples is that there's an incredibly robust energy and climate innovation ecosystem that already exists today that includes some of our, you know, brightest companies, our most important innovators. But the issue is they don't want to work with the federal government because it's too slow. They don't want to stand up an entire federal business development practice because they don't want to try to deal with the regulations associated with, you know, government contracts. And that's something that we believe is a missed opportunity and something that we're trying to help mitigate with the RISE Consortium. So number one, we're trying to address speed. As Chris mentioned, you know, we can surge capacity to get contracts underway and work beginning in an exponentially quicker time period. And that's good for the government that has urgent national requirements, and that's good for industry that needs to work at that speed because there's so much opportunity out there in this space right now. Number two, I think, you know, I would submit that a lot of the companies that I mentioned would love to work with the Department of Defense or the US government. They would love access to non-dilutive capital to help develop and deploy and validate their technologies. But again, they just can't make that decision or make that investment because they're because they are working at, you know, the technological innovation edge. And so government misses out on a lot of those companies and misses out on the technologies that they bring. We are trying to provide them access to that, which I think is an unambiguous good for the government. But it's also good for industry. It's also good to have you know, non-dilutive capital from an incredibly secure creditor. So we're trying to create those opportunities with the private sector. And then number three, you'll be able, under the RISE Consortium, to collaborate much more directly than you would with a traditional, in traditional contracting situations. You'll be able to help shape the government's requirements because you need to, and the government will be able to understand better this, the consortium's overall technological capabilities based on the companies that are included. And that's good for the government because far too often we see solicitations and government requirements that aren't keyed to what the private sector is able to offer. And it turns out a bad contracting experience for both parties. The government doesn't get what it wants, and the private sector doesn't get what it wants. We think that this is a better solution. And then finally, we won't be just encouraging collaboration between government policymakers and individual RISE Consortium members. We'll actually be actively, and we already are actively promoting collaboration between RISE Consortium members. so that different members can team together to offer more comprehensive and better targeted capabilities to the government. And we're already seeing, and Chris alluded to this earlier, we're already seeing what an incredibly robust community this is, with so many different kinds of companies. Many other of the consortia that Chris can speak to that he manages are somewhat niche technologies. They're really focused on particular sets of technologies that may be unique to the Defense Department or to militaries. That's not true here. Everybody needs resilient infrastructure and secure energy. And what we're seeing is an exponential growth in the kinds of companies and the number of companies and organizations that want to participate in RISE. In fact, we started in March with 4 companies. By August, we hit more than 260, and I think today we're in the 280, 270s, 280s for the number of organizations and companies that have gotten involved with RISE. So we've seen just an exponential amount of interest and growth. We are leading up to the Defense Tech Connect for our first in-person engagement and in-person gathering of RISE members. We'd encourage all of you to think about joining RISE and have the opportunity to join us at Defense Tech Connect at the Gaylord National Hotel and Convention Center at National Harbor. So some key events. Monday, October 18th, we'll be hosting an innovation challenge. We got more than 160 submissions for this innovation challenge, and we down selected to our top 15, which we'll be pitching at Defense Tech Connect on Monday afternoon. We'll also be hosting or joining the Expo and Showcase networking reception that evening. And then on Tuesday, we'll be hosting a keynote panel really focused on what the Department of Defense, with some senior key climate officials within the Department of Defense and the military services, what's happening, what you can expect to see. Why are we even focused on this issue? Why is the Defense Department focused on this issue? So you can hear it from them directly. And then finally, we'll be hosting our first ever member-only meeting in person that afternoon. Some important things. If you want to come to any of the RISE programming, it's free. You just have to register at Defense Tech Connect. And if you want to attend Defense Tech Connect and you're a RISE member, you can get 50% off. You can contact us at rise@ati.org to learn more about membership and registration, and we can answer any of your questions with regard to that. But that's maybe what I want to end on is, well, how do you join RISE? It is easy, it is free, it is a one-page membership agreement that's minimally restrictive. So we make it as easy as possible for you to join this community. And let me also make one thing clear for folks who are on the government side today. You are unfortunately not able to join RISE because you're the stakeholders that we're trying to pursue to talk with and collaborate with. However, all of our programming is also both free, available, and we would encourage you to join us and collaborate with us. We have a separate email list specifically for our government stakeholders. So you can just reach out again at rise@ati.org to be added to that. And we will ensure that you are included in the conversation going forward. For everybody else who's not a current government employee, we would really encourage you to join. We have individuals joining as well as companies. We have DOE national laboratories. We have nonprofit organizations. So all of that is available to you. Even at this point, we're doing a huge amount of programming, monthly webinars on key topics that are important to the Department of Defense and the private sector right now. And we're going to see more of that moving forward as we get to and past the October in-person event. So we're really excited about this. Chris, we have a lot of questions here that I want to dig into. So I want to make sure that we have time for that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I can figure that out.
You can't leave me the spotlight on me, Mike. Make sure you get my pictures away.
Okay, so let's dig in. Let's dig into some of the questions. There's a question here around about how much of the 20 billion that you mentioned in 2022 was geared toward resilience, and I think that really raises an interesting question about, well, how does this stuff work, Chris? Like, how do we see a portfolio program in your experience working with these consortia? How do you see a portfolio really being built up and getting to funding and starting to issue solicitations? What does that process look like?
Okay, Mike, that's a great question, and I'm going to try to answer it. I'm going to step just a little bit back from that question to answer, provide a broad answer to a lot of the fantastic questions that are coming in. And in doing that, I hope to answer the question you just asked. First of all, I need to reiterate the state of the RISE Consortium. This is a startup consortium. Oftentimes, these consortia can start almost an infinite number of ways, but recognizing the challenge that we thought America faced in its future, in its near future, late or middle of last summer, Mike and I got together and thought this would be a great platform upon which to build a consortium. We took the approach that we will build the consortium and then we will approach potential funding sponsors to engage the consortium and solve their challenges through funding of portfolios through the RISE Consortium and its membership. To date, we have engaged some incredibly senior people who have indicated and demonstrated incredible enthusiasm, but as we are still building up the government staffing roles, if you will, since the change in administration, the other transaction is not signed yet. So we are not actually reviewing technical projects and technologies through the RISE Consortium. We're laying the groundwork to build the portfolio in the technology areas. I just want to make that clear, is that I know many of you have great ideas. I've seen some fantastic ideas just in the questions alone, but in fact, we're not reviewing technology areas right now. I think a lot of the sidebar discussions that are likely to happen in our October meetings at the Defense Tech Connect will engage specific technologies and further enthuse our government sponsors. But we don't have another transactions in place yet. We're trying to build the membership and show the enthusiasm, say, wow, this is something that I think we really want to get going on. So it's if they build it, if we build it, they will come. It's kind of the model, the Field of Dreams model that we're following here. And we have other examples where this has worked incredibly well, but it's not the routine. So I don't want to lead you to believe that we have millions and millions and billions of dollars of funding sitting in the cheap seats just waiting to get executed. It's not there yet. But so to answer your question, where are we right now? One of the questions was how much of the 20 billion? None of the $20 billion that I referred to, or nearly $20 billion, 15 to $20 billion in FY20, was executed specifically through the RISE Consortium because the other transaction doesn't exist. There are several consortia that address tangential and adjacent areas. Electrification of vehicles is a very small subset of the Defense Automotive Technology Consortium and the National Advanced Mobility Consortium. So there's some dollars going through those two consortia. Some of the cybersecurity stuff that's critical to protecting the grid long term is being executed through several of the other consortia. So there's some adjacent areas that we are attempting to bring together under the RISE Consortium that are being funded. The exact dollars of those, it's not in the billions. It's tens and 20s of millions through 15, 20 projects here and there. But I don't have the specific numbers because they're in consortia that mostly we don't mostly manage, and they're not really the focus of those consortia. But there is funding going to those technology areas. But where we're at right now is we hope to be very close. We're in discussions with several potential funding sponsors. Once we have a funding sponsor that raises his hand and says, I'll be the sponsor, his or her hand says, I'll be the sponsor, we will hopefully then shortly thereafter have another transactions agreement. And from that other transactions agreement, we will have already pre-staged the first set of requirements documents based on the work we've done both with the members who've already joined and the potential sponsors who say that they will fund technology development and innovation through this consortium. We'll bring all those folks together as, kind of in parallel path, such that we'll put a solicitation out as soon as another transactions agreement signed. I don't have a date for that because, whenever you predict a date for an acquisition action, you're always wrong. So I try not to do that. But I hope that answered the question, Mike, as best I could. That's the process and where we're at. We hope to have more things to announce at the October meeting, but as we go through the fall, I expect we will start to see some exciting developments. And this meeting today is just part of the development of the consortia side of things right now.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And I think that is a good lead into another one of the questions, which is you had mentioned vehicle electrification. One of the things that we've been doing to provide value to our members while we're still seeking another transactions agreement by which to execute solicitations is we're hosting this series of informative webinars where we're gathering together members of RISE who have key technologies and policymakers and DoD program managers who are working on executing those priorities and bringing them together to talk about their shared interest and collaboration. And you can find all of those events, past events recorded at rise-consortium.org/events. And that includes our most recent webinar, which is actually on DoD's interest in vehicle electrification, where we hosted a ton of really great speakers from across the military services and private sector innovators who are working on this issue. So you can, another reason to go to the RISE Consortium website, rise-consortium.org. We have a question from a distinguished visitor, Lieutenant General Eric Wesley, who until recently served as the Deputy Commander at U.S. Army Futures Command and really has led the charge on vehicle electrification for much of the tactical fleet and transforming the operational energy supply chain. And so his question is, who is going to be leading the charge around collaborating with the government and building the private sector capabilities around that issue set? And, General Wesley, I think we would certainly invite you to participate in that process. One of the things that we're trying to do is really build an understanding from our members and from our government stakeholders and collaborators. What are the issues that are going to be key? We laid out operational energy resilience, installation energy resilience, and climate resilience because we know those are going to be the key categories going forward. But one of the things that we want to do is really get a little bit more granular and a sort of tighter understanding about what that exactly means. And I think to General Wesley's point, one of those issues is absolutely going to be transforming energy supply chains for our operational forces and really thinking about, how we create a much more robust and much more resilient supply chain to ensure that we have access to energy, whether that's electricity or fuels or what I imagine to be some transition to a mix of both, so that we have access to those capabilities when and where they're needed most. And I think we're going to see that being one of the key issues that comes, very early on within the RISE Consortium. There's a question from Sam Brower on, are there opportunities for consultants here? And I think, Chris, I'll throw that to you. I think, we have seen some real interest in the professional services organizations, but actually a question to you is, have you seen beyond sort of technology startups and folks with technologies, what else have you seen be possible under other transactions agreements that would be more in line with professional services and analysis?
So, Mike, I'll try to answer that question and not talk back over myself if I can. From a specific services perspective, the basic CETA type stuff. That is really not the purpose of these technology consortia. But from a true technology consultant, at the end of this thing, we need to prioritize. There is never enough money, never enough time to do absolutely everything that might be needed in a very short period of time. So through prioritization, through strategic planning, those types of things oftentimes require the input and the support of external consultants, either directly to the RISE Consortium and oftentimes to the members. Some of these non-traditional defense contractors have incredible technologies, but because of where they had designed that technology to be implemented, they might not necessarily see how it would tie into a bigger project or a larger scale opportunity that we're trying to pursue with the Resilient Infrastructure and Secure Energy Consortium. So there is significant opportunity for consultants, but it's not, I don't think you will ever see a solicitation coming out of a consortium that says we're seeking to hire consultants. The RISE Consortium may seek consultants to support strategic planning, to support prioritization, to support some of the smaller non-traditional defense contractors in imagining, if you will, how to transition technologies that were built for one purpose to something that the RISE Consortium is focused on. I hope that answers your question. There is opportunity. It's just you'll never. My thought is, and I have rarely seen a solicitation that directly seeks consulting services, if you will.
Yeah, I think that's right, Chris. I mean, I think one of the key highlights around OT authority that's granted to DoD is that it focuses on prototypes. But within that definition, there's an explicit understanding that business process prototypes are included within that definition of prototype. So there are things that are not technology related at all, or that are focused on prototyping and demonstrating the possibility of contracting models or analysis. And I think that's an opportunity where we're not talking about necessarily about steel in the ground. We're talking about changing the way the department does business. And that's certainly within the line of what is available and possible under OT. I have a question from Jorge Cueto, and it's a two-part question that I think is both parts are really interesting and important. One is, what would you say a TRL has to be to of an innovation has to be to compete for an OTA? Chris, is there any TRL requirement that you would see?
So there's a lot of, there's a lot of information within the legislation that talks about the need to develop prototype or a technology that contributes to the development of a prototype. Prototyping by its very nature is, TRL 5, 6, 7 area. Sometimes you'll see 4 and 5 that because it contributes in its early stage. What you won't see is the basic research. The basic research is covered by another or by the research OT that we've heard to. So, but we're also not trying. It's not a production output at the very end. Should the prototype development be successful, is certainly possible, but that's not necessarily the intent going in, or that they're not looking for that mature technology. Now, what I will tell you is that something that is in production or production ready that might be repurposed, retooled, because it's a commercial off-the-shelf technology and may need to be retooled for a different need. That type of stuff is certainly within the domain of other transactions agreements, but kind of advanced research that, I like to always say this is R&D, research, development, and prototyping, very small R, very big D, and very big P, if that kind of makes sense for you. No, rather than giving a number, because it's not in the legislation per se.
And the other half of Jorge's question really focused on, if he's somebody who has a technology and he's looking to understand whether it's a fit for the department and whether it's something that is that something that they could run by us? And let me just say immediately, yes. So if you have a technology and you're considering whether it's something that is a fit for DoD, that's one of the, I think, precise services that we hope to be able to help convey. So you can reach out again to rise@ati.org and email, and that email will go to this team. So we'd love to hear from you. We have a question from Holland Wood that I think is also really appropriate. How do the opportunities available to tech businesses via RISE differ from those through other DoD funding efforts like AFWorks? And I have some thoughts, Chris, but I'll let you jump
Okay.
into that as
So
well.
I'll give you a very basic answer, and I'll turn it over to Mike because he claimed he had thoughts. So I think innovation in the Department of Defense and innovation in the federal government is accelerating at a pace that has never before been seen, including the stand-up of AFWorks and SoftWorks and NavalX and those type of enterprises. You have DIUX, or now DIU. You have these consortia. There is a place for all of those to mesh together in a seamless development stream, if you will. We're not there yet, and I will say that AFWorks and the like enterprises are doing incredibly important work, and they're fielding lots of technology ideas, lots of concepts. And I think they're great feeders to the prototyping opportunities that consortia like RISE hope to offer. So I think there is a development stream, as I said, that fits. There are some gaps and there are some overlaps, and so there's no perfect answer. But typically it's kind of it can be a feeder to some of these larger type projects that aren't typically funded in the works model. That's not to say they couldn't be funded there.
Yeah, Chris, I mean, I think you nailed it. I think the RISE Consortium is incredibly complementary to a lot of these organizations that focus on innovation within the Department of Defense. If you look at, we're already having great conversations with the Defense Innovation Unit, with AFWorks, with others. And what their focus is mainly on jumpstarting this interest within the service or within DoD for collaboration with the private sector. And we really hope to be the connective tissue and to be the institutional memory for a lot of that work. You saw with the AFWorks Challenge, more than 1,000 submissions from all kinds of companies and an incredible amount of excitement and interest. And what we want to do is make sure that that interest really comes through, not just for a year, not just for 3 years, but for a decade plus, because that's what it's going to take to transform our military's approach to these issues, is sustained attention and sustained engagement and collaboration and leadership. And so that's, we want to make sure that we're there to help, continue that and sustain that throughout that time period. There's a question that I think we can address really quickly from Joseph Rendy. Forgive me if I pronounce your name wrong. Are there opportunities for cybersecurity companies under the energy security mission set? Just absolutely. I think that cybersecurity is inextricably intertwined with our challenges around critical infrastructure and critical infrastructure access. And one of the things that I think is a real key opportunity is the ability to work with and access and collaborate with a bunch of companies that aren't necessarily cybersecurity companies by nature, to create complementary teaming opportunities. And it's explicitly something that I think we will be focused on as a consortium. We got a few more minutes. We have a lot of questions, so we're not probably going to get to answer all of them. One question, Chris Beck from the Electric Infrastructure Security Council asks up top, is just, will this recording and these slides be available in the future? Yes, we will be following up with everybody who attended and even everybody who registered for this session to receive a recording of this session. See, I'm going through some more. There's a question here. This is actually really interesting, Chris, and I will send this to you. Can we introduce technology that DoD is not asking for? I'm working with a technology that's TRL 6.7, but I don't see DoD asking for this capability because DoD doesn't know it exists. I think that's a really interesting question. What about in your past experience with all of your other consortia? Is that something that you've seen where in the lead up to you've actually clued DoD in on something that has been a capability that it subsequently sought but didn't know about in advance?
So Michael, it's a fantastic question, and I think that is one of the huge value propositions of the consortium model. It has not only access to decision makers and technologists, the entire gamut of government R&D enterprise leaders, as well as fellow technology members of the consortia. And that exchange of information is a critical part of the collaborative process that we're capable of offering under this. So there'll be a lot of ideation meetings, a lot of collaboration events, and a lot of the technology development. Not a lot, but a lot of the technology development starts with, have you ever thought of doing it this way? And frankly, to me, when those things can happen, you see the greatest benefit. We see that B2B and business to government. I'll say more often than just something that has never been thought of by the federal government, what we see very frequently is that a request does not reflect state of the art. In other words, someone asks for a particular technology, and in the discussions that happen before the final solicitation's put out, there's robust discussion that says, that's 2 generations ago technology. We've leapt forward by 3 generations, and we think this is what your requirements to say. And by the way, if we add this piece to it, you're going to get 5x what you were soliciting for only 2x the cost. So you see a lot of that type of ideation and imagination and to inform requirements. That discussion. One of the benefits of using other transactions agreements is those robust discussions to get not only great solutions, is to get better requirements. When you have great requirements and then you get even better solutions to those great requirements, this process works as it was intended and designed to do. So absolutely, you can do that. We hope to provide a forum for you to do that frequently. And one of the things that we are putting together is bringing experts from all walks of leadership in the federal government to the fore so that we can have those discussions once we can get ourselves and other transaction agreement to execute those projects under.
Excellent, thanks, Chris. There's one last question that'll be very quick. How do we see the topics covered by RISE? Again, you can go to rise-consortium.org for much more information. You can see recordings of all of our events so far. We've hosted, I think this is our 4th pretty intense event that we've done about what RISE is, who's working on these issues within DoD and the rest of the government. We are thinking about other stakeholders and government stakeholders beyond the Department of Defense. That was another question that came up. You saw the list of organizations and administrative agencies that currently possess OT authority. Not all of them use it. We'll be thinking about ways in which this issue set, which transcends so many different issues around national interests and national security interests going forward. And again, you can reach out to the entire RISE team at rise@ati.org, and we'd love to hear from you. And we'll be happy to follow up and answer any questions that you have But first, let me thank Tech Connect. We have reached time. Let me thank Tech Connect and Laura. Chris, thank you so much for your insights and your help. And thanks to everybody who attended. It's a really great event, really wonderful and robust discussion. So with that, I'll sign off to Laura and let her wrap up. Thanks.
Yeah, I couldn't say it better. Thank you so much to both of you. It's been an honor, and we look forward to following up with everyone afterwards. So have a great afternoon and evening, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.